When silence becomes strength. The proud journey of Jaylen Brooks. The boy arrived at school, quiet, not wanting attention, just hoping to graduate peacefully. Jaylen Brooks wasn't the type of person who wanted to stand out. Not at his old school, and certainly not at Dayton Central High, where he had just transferred from Gary, Indiana. That morning the sky was overcast, like a blanket that hadn't been folded properly, still dotted with moisture from the rain the night before. No one spoke much on the bus. The sound of the engine, the tires splashing through the puddles on the road, was the only noise. Jaylen sat alone, his hands gripping the straps of his old backpack, his gaze fixed on the misted window. He didn't expect anything, no grand hopes. He just wanted to get through it, survive the last year of high school. Dayton Central was bigger, noisier, and more crowded than his old school. Groups of students clustered together like small sharks, laughing, bumping into each other, staring at him like a scratch on a clean window. No one greeted him. No one smiled. But Jaylen knew that look, one of people sizing him up in their heads. His skin was darker. His voice had the industrial northern accent. And his clothes, just a simple hoodie, faded shoes, no brand, no style. Jaylen went straight to the main office. The clerk handed him a schedule with a smile that was too perfect to be genuine. "Welcome to Dayton Central, Jaylen. If you get lost, just ask one of the aides. You'll be fine." He just nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." The first class was U.S. History. Jaylen chose a seat at the back of the room, near the window. He didn't look around, but he felt it, the stares, the whispers. A boy with messy buzz-cut hair, Jaylen would later learn his name was Cody Renshaw, leaned over to his friend and said something, followed by a loud laugh. Jaylen heard it, but he didn't turn his head. At lunch, Jaylen sat alone. His lunch was a peanut butter sandwich that his mother had packed for him. He ate slowly while the noise around him was like the distant sounds of the ocean. On the other side of the cafeteria were Cody, sitting with two others, Brent, tall and skinny, constantly cracking his knuckles, and TJ, quiet but with eyes like knives. They stared at him, said nothing. But their smirks, the twisted smiles, as if Jaylen were the appetizer. Jaylen didn't respond. He just lowered his head, took another bite of his sandwich, his gaze still fixed on the wall behind them. In gym class, Jaylen didn't go after the basketball, didn't show off. He passed the ball, kept his distance. No one remembered his name after the class, except for Cody. As he walked by, Cody made sure to shoulder-check Jaylen. "Move, Bruce Lee," he sneered. Jaylen stood still. He didn't retreat, didn't advance, just stared ahead into the void. A deep breath. No response. And that was what caught Cody's attention. Jaylen didn't want to stand out, but he couldn't control how others reacted to his silence. Back in Gary, Indiana, where he grew up, things were even harsher. There, fists were how people communicated, and Jaylen had learned to silently avoid those senseless cycles. He lived with his grandfather, Leon Brooks, a former Marine who had survived Vietnam. His grandfather had taught him the basic principle: never start a fight, but if someone forces you to finish it, make it clean. Jaylen had practiced Shotokan karate since he was 7. He knew how to take down a man twice his size with a single strike. But the first thing he learned wasn't how to punch. It was how to control himself. At Dayton Central, Jaylen just wanted peace. But that peace, from day one, was seen as a challenge. He walked into the school like a shadow, but in that silence was a deep, quiet energy, like an old well. People like Cody didn't understand that. To them, silence was weakness. Not responding meant fear. And because of that, they wanted to push. Push him to speak, push him to break. But Jaylen didn't break. He just kept walking quietly through the halls, through the whispers, through the accidental shoulder bumps. No resentment, no complaints, no teacher reports. In a world where everyone tried to make an impression, Jaylen chose to survive on inner strength. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew he could. And being able didn't mean he had to act. But as his grandfather once said, true peace doesn't come from the absence of conflict. It comes when you are strong enough to not need it. Jaylen didn't come to Dayton Central to be a hero. He just wanted to graduate, just wanted peace. But sometimes the people who aren't looking for glory accidentally become the guiding light for the lost ones. And Jaylen's journey was just beginning. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It's the way of someone who has learned that real power doesn't need to speak. But the more silent he became, the more attention he attracted. Whispers, curious stares, then came the cruel jokes. He didn't fight back. He just stayed silent. And it was that silence that made them angrier. 3 days after Jaylen Brooks appeared at Dayton Central High, his name started to be whispered behind his back like a strange curse. Not because he did anything wrong, not because he hit anyone, but because he didn't do anything at all. In a school where reputation was made by spectacular dunks on the basketball court, slide jabs on TikTok, or at least one trip to the principal's office, Jaylen's absolute silence was a raw provocation. In biology class, Jaylen sat at the back, his eyes on the board, his hands taking careful notes. Whenever the teacher asked, he knew the answer, but only spoke if called on. Even then, his voice was quiet, calm, without hesitation or boasting. That was the problem. People couldn't stand someone who didn't need anyone. By the second week, the jokes began. Someone secretly drew a circle on the back of Jaylen's shirt with a whiteout pen, a target. The next day, there was a note stuffed into his desk. "Are you an alien?" Jaylen folded the note without reading it a second time. He didn't report it to the teacher, didn't ask anyone, just silently tucked it into his pocket and continued to take notes. But that drove them mad. In the cafeteria, Cody, the one always looking for trouble, walked up to Jaylen's table. "Hey, ninja, don't you get bored sitting alone?" he sneered. Jaylen didn't respond, didn't look at him, didn't eat. Just put his spoon down and stared out the window. Brent stood behind Cody, laughing. Maybe he can't talk? Is he mute now? Jaylen still didn't react. No flushing, no lowering his head, no anger. Just stillness? They left with an uncomfortable feeling they couldn't name. Jaylen's silence wasn't like fear. It was something threatening. As though beneath that calm surface there was a tiger coiled up, not because it was weak, but because it was waiting. By the third week, things escalated. One morning, when Jaylen opened his locker, a bag of white powder, flour, fell all over him. Someone had attached a GoPro camera in the hall and filmed the entire scene, then uploaded the video to Instagram with the caption, "Octopus Jaylen, now he's whiter." The video got nearly 300 likes in 2 hours. Jaylen wiped the flour off his shirt, didn't say a word, didn't complain. No response. Even when the teacher asked, he just replied, "I'm fine." That night, Jaylen came home later than usual. His grandfather, Leon Brooks, was sitting on the couch, the TV muted. "Anything happen at school?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp as a razor. Jaylen didn't answer right away. He just sat down, took off his shoes, and stared at his hands. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said quietly. "But they're getting worse." Leon nodded. His eyes were deep, as though he had seen war more than once. "They're scared of you," he said, "not because you're big, but because you don't respond the way they want you to. That's power, Jay. But power has to be used wisely." Jaylen nodded, but remained silent. The next morning, in chemistry class, someone had spilled water on Jaylen's seat before he arrived. He noticed, didn't sit there, didn't shout, didn't report it. He just grabbed a napkin, wiped it dry, then moved to another seat. Not a word. At recess, Cody caught up with him outside on the gym field. "Hey, you think you're better than us?" he growled. "That silence? You think you're so deep?" Jaylen stood still. His eyes locked onto Cody's. No fear, no challenge, just understanding. "No," Jaylen said, the first words he had spoken in days. "I just don't need to be like you." One sentence, but it was like a slap without a hand. Cody turned red, didn't say anything. His fists clenched, but then they relaxed. The others didn't laugh like usual. No videos, no cheering crowds. Just silence. And the strange feeling that appeared for the first time. Respect. From that day on, the jokes stopped. Not because Jaylen hit anyone, not because a teacher intervened, but because everyone realized Jaylen's silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. He didn't live for recognition, didn't fear being hated. And because of that, they didn't know where to attack him from. Jaylen still sat at the back of the room, still walked alone, but from a distance, the looks were no longer mocking. They were curious, cautious, respectful. When others try to provoke you and you don't react, you've already won, not because you're silent, but because you're the only one still in control of yourself. 3. There were times when he asked himself, what's the point of staying silent? Nothing changes. He started to get angry, a quiet anger simmering beneath the surface. It didn't flare up like a fire, but sneaked in like smoke. It slipped through the cracks of his heart, choking his chest. He wanted to scream, he wanted to hit, he wanted to cry. But in the end, he still chose silence. One afternoon, Jaylen stood by the school's back fence, the sun not yet fully down, but his heart was as dark as coal. The school was still noisy as usual. Laughter, shoes tapping on the sports field, music blaring from someone's phone. But to Jaylen, everything felt like a silent film, just images, no sound. Because in his head there was another sound, screams that he would never let out. That day, the math teacher assigned a group project. Jaylen was paired with 2 classmates, Mila and Jordan. Mila forced a smile when she saw his name. Jordan sighed. "How are we supposed to work with this stone statue?" Jordan muttered. Jaylen heard it clearly, but said nothing. He quietly opened his book and began his part of the work. Jordan pushed his chair back. "Fine, you want to play the silent game, then do it all by yourself." Mila looked at Jordan, then at Jaylen, but didn't say anything. A small explosion went off in Jaylen's heart. No one heard it, but he knew. That afternoon, when he returned to the lunch table, he found his lunchbox had been tipped over. When he flipped it open, it was filled with wet napkins and a slice of old cold cut. No one was around. No one was looking at him. But Jaylen knew. There was someone behind it, someone who had reached out and then disappeared into the laughter. He stood there, holding the mangled lunchbox, eyes looking down as if pondering what to do. This was the 3rd time this week, and for the first time he didn't feel sad. He felt angry. That night, Jaylen couldn't sleep. He sat on his bed, the dim nightlight glowing. In his hand was a notebook, its pages filled with neat, tidy writing, just like him. But this time his hand gripped the pen tightly. And then he wrote in slanted letters. For the first time, a crooked, erratic line appeared on the page. What do they think they are? He stopped, looked at the words, then wrote another line. And more lines followed, like water breaking a dam. They think I'll keep enduring forever? I'm not a robot, not a statue. I know anger, I know pain. Why don't I scream? The white page suddenly became a place for venting, not with fists, not with screams, but with ink getting bolder, bolder, until the paper tore. The next morning, Jaylen walked into class with a different look in his eyes. He was still silent, but there was a thin layer of smoke in his gaze, slowly burning, waiting. No one noticed right away. But Mila did. During recess, she approached him, the first time in days since they were classmates. "Jaylen," she whispered. "I'm sorry. About yesterday." Jordan shouldn't have said that. He looked up, at her. His gaze wasn't cold, wasn't angry, just deep, like he was seeing himself reflected back. "I'm not mad at you," he said. "I'm just mad at everything." Mila hesitated. "Then, why didn't you say anything?" Jaylen smiled faintly. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd carried a question for too long without anyone asking it for them. "Because I used to think silence was the best way to not be like them," he said. "But now I'm not so sure." Jaylen walked away, leaving Mila standing there in the hallway. That afternoon, he walked past the sports field. Cody was blasting music, yelling with his friends. The music was so loud it drowned out the PA system. A ball bounced toward Jaylen. He bent down to pick it up, tossed it back. Cody raised his hand, laughing mockingly. "Thanks, Ninja." "You finally speaking today?" Jaylen stood still, the ball in his hand, his heart pounding, eyes locked on Cody. In that moment, Jaylen wanted to throw the ball at his face. Really. His hand tightened around the ball, eyes unblinking. His whole life, he had avoided conflict. But now the thought of resistance felt like a survival instinct. He didn't want to swallow his anger anymore. But then, he let go. Not because he was scared, but because he knew. This anger wasn't ready to explode yet. Not now. But it would. Jaylen tossed the ball back lightly, silently. This time, Cody didn't laugh. At home, Jaylen sat by the window, watching the red sunset. Inside, something was changing. Like he wasn't just someone who endured anymore. He was still silent. But it wasn't surrender. It was a kind of waiting. Sometimes silence isn't the end. It's another beginning. A beginning for someone who is learning to hold the flame, rather than avoiding it. 4. Then came a moment when he couldn't take it anymore. He screamed, in the classroom, in front of the crowd, amidst the eyes that felt like needles against his skin. No one expected it, least of all him. On that Monday morning, the classroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, not because of a test, but because of Jaylen. Everyone looked at him, not a word, but their eyes spoke everything. Rumors spread like wildfire. Jaylen drew on the hallway wall after class. A huge charcoal drawing, a student sitting in a metal cage surrounded by distorted, smiling faces wearing masks. Underneath the drawing, "I'm silent, but I see everything." No one knew who the artist was, but everyone suspected Jaylen. In literature class, the teacher walked in, holding a photo of the graffiti. She didn't name anyone, just said, "Whoever did this should take responsibility. We're here to learn to listen to each other, not attack each other."
The whole class turned to look at Jaylen. He still sat there, not admitting, not denying. His eyes lowered, hands clenched tightly under the desk. The teacher sighed and turned away. But then another voice rang out from the back of the room. "There's no way he would dare draw that." The whole class snickered. Jaylen looked up. He didn't know what controlled him next. Maybe it was the suffocating frustration of the past year. Maybe it was the lunchbox incident. Maybe it was the look in Mila's eyes when she was about to say something, but didn't. But he stood up, slamming the chair. The whole class fell silent. Jaylen stared straight at his classmates, his face flushed, hands trembling slightly. And then he screamed, not a roar, but a string of words full of pain and fury. "Do you know how hard it is to stay silent? Do you know how many times I've had to swallow it to keep from crying? You think I don't see it? I see everything, every look, every whisper behind my back." The teacher's face turned pale. The class froze. Jaylen panted. But he didn't stop. "I drew that wall. Yes, it was me. Because no one dared to speak up. No one was willing to listen. If you're uncomfortable now, well, this is just the beginning." A brief silence, like a storm, had passed through. No one laughed, no one spoke, only the sound of heartbeats. And for the first time, Jaylen stood in the classroom without bowing his head. That day, the graffiti on the wall wasn't erased. It was framed temporarily with tape. A week later, the school held a listening to students session, suggested by the principal himself. And Jaylen? He didn't say much anymore. He didn't need to, because this time, the whole school was listening. That turning point didn't come when he won first place, but when he dared to step onto the stage, knowing he might lose. The day Min signed up for the school-wide speech contest, everyone was surprised. A student who once stumbled over reading in front of the class. A student who, every time called upon, would lower his head, hands trembling. But this time, Min stood tall. He wrote his name with a firm stroke, as if signing a commitment to himself. "Why did you sign up?" the teacher asked. Min just smiled gently. "Because I don't want to always be just a spectator in my own story." In the days that followed, Min practiced as if living in a parallel world. He borrowed the library's room to speak loudly before rows of empty chairs. He recorded each segment, listening to it again, crossing out the awkward lines. Sometimes he spoke in front of the mirror, adjusting every expression, every gaze. His friends mocked behind his back. "Go up there and stutter, and you're done." He must have been forced to do it. But Min kept practicing, not to win, but so that he wouldn't give up again. On the day of the contest, he was the 13th contestant. An odd number, the unlucky number, people said. But for Min, it marked the first time he dared to do something unsafe. He stepped onto the stage. His eyes scanned the rows of seats, some people giggling, some not bothering to look up from their phones. He took a deep breath. "Hello, everyone. I'm not here to prove that I'm the best. I'm here to prove that I'm no longer afraid." The entire hall paused. Min spoke about the first time he was criticized for having a voice that sounded like a failed rap, about the group study sessions where he silently made slides, about the feeling of being consumed by the shadow of silence. Not everyone is born to win, but everyone has the right to step up and be heard. As he lowered his head to conclude, applause rang out. Not loud, but sincere. Min didn't win first place. He finished fourth. No medal, no name on the honor roll. But the next day, a younger student quietly approached and whispered, "Because of you, I signed up for the storytelling contest." Min smiled. He didn't need a big stage. Just one person changing was enough to win. And then, that boy changed. Not to become like everyone else, but to have the courage to still be himself, with pride. In the new school year, Jaylen entered class like someone walking onto a stage, not to perform, but to declare, "I'm here, and I'm not sorry for it." No more hoodie pulled over his face, no more crouching in the corner of the room. Jaylen wore a white shirt, buttons neatly fastened, in his hand an old sketchbook, its edges worn, but every pencil stroke inside was a vivid and powerful world. That day, when the teacher asked, "Who wants to share something they're proud of?" No one raised their hand. Only Jaylen, from the middle row, stood up. The class turned, a few glares, some wary glances. Jaylen opened his sketchbook, his voice calm, not trembling. "I'm proud that I once thought I should be silent and decided not to anymore."
He flipped through the pages. Pictures appeared, a student crying quietly in the bathroom, a hand pouring water on a test, a teacher handing a student a tissue. We go to school, but no one teaches us how to exist when we're made to disappear. There was a soft intake of breath from the teacher. A few classmates dropped their gaze to the table. Jaylen looked straight ahead. "I don't need your pity. I just need to be seen for who I really am." And for the first time, no one mocked him. The next week, Jaylen was invited to join the literature club. Then he became the one designing posters for the Student Truth Day event. Not because anyone forced him, but because he chose to step forward. Jaylen still wasn't loud. He still liked being alone. But now he drew right in the middle of the schoolyard. He read poetry at seminars. He helped classmates finish presentations and put his name at the end in small letters. He didn't blend into the crowd. He made the crowd expand to make room for him. One day, a new student transferred in. The boy was trembling, his gaze just like Jaylen's from the year before. Jaylen approached him, extended his hand. If you haven't found a place to belong yet, then start here. Starting with one person, one voice, one change. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you found this content helpful, inspiring, or simply made you smile a little, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. Each view, each comment, each share is a huge motivation for me to continue creating, improving content, and bringing even better things. This channel isn't just mine, it's ours, those who love kindness, sincerity, and real stories. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.